Just weeks ago, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban stepped on stage in Texas and took his place among leading figures of the American right like Steve Bannon, Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, and, of course, Papa John.
He has no pizza experience.
But this isn't a story about pizza. It's a bizarre story of the Republican fascination with a country the size of Indiana and an economy no larger than Washington, D.C.'s. Today, Orban speaks alongside Republicans in Texas, while his anti-LGBT legislation back home inspires lawmakers in Florida. And last year, Tucker Carlson visited Budapest and had this to say.
He thinks families are more important than banks. He believes countries need borders.
But despite Tucker's portrait of Orban as a family man, the reality is more sinister. Since coming to power in 2010, Orban has basically dismantled Hungarian liberal democracy, rendering elections all but meaningless. But Orban, who began his career as a liberal reformer, wasn't always like this, and neither was the Republican Party. Just 8 years ago, John McCain even called Orban
a neofascist dictator.
So, who is Viktor Orban? And why do Republicans now love him so much? The answers reveal disturbing but urgent truths about the fragility of liberal democracy and the looming threat of nationalist populism. Our story begins in 1989, at the end of the Cold War. Now, you probably know the buzzwords: nukes, mutually assured destruction, the space race, Vietnam. As the usual story goes, the US and Soviet Union have been engaged in an ideological competition for about 4 decades, a struggle between communism and liberalism. That liberalism is about to win. But what is liberalism? Well, it can be confusing, mainly because in the US today, liberal usually means left or progressive. But in most other times and places, liberalism means an ideology that centers individual freedom, property rights, equality before the law, and other things. In essence, the foundational components of democracy. As the world found itself entering this dramatic period of change, in communist Hungary, a young Viktor Orban was at the forefront of the liberal resistance. In an illegal move that put him in potentially mortal danger, he founded Fidesz, a youth activist organization committed to upending communist rule and establishing liberal democracy. As leader, he delivered a major speech in Budapest in further defiance of Hungary's communist government and helped negotiate the country's democratic transition. By October of 1989, the communist government gave up. When the country held its first free and fair elections in 1990, Orban led Fidesz as a center-left and liberal political party. But when all his hard work was rewarded with a stinging defeat at the polls, Orban determined to change course. Over the course of the next 8 years and 2 election cycles, Orban steadily steered the party toward the political right, though without abandoning a commitment to liberalism. By the 1998 elections, his rightward maneuvering paid off. Fidesz won the most votes, and Orban became prime minister. He governed as a relatively conventional European conservative, but for all his patience and adaptation, he was rewarded with only this single short term. In 2002, he lost a close election to a coalition of the left and center. In 2006, the results were worse. Frustrated, Orban returned to his old tactics, taking Fidesz even further to the right and ramping up criticism of his opponents as more beholden to globalists than the Hungarian people. And soon, Orban would look like a prophet.
És közben egyébként nem csináltunk semmit 4 évig. Semmit. Nyilvánvalóan végig hazudtuk az utolsó 1,5-2 évet. Teljesen világos volt, hogy amit mondunk, az nem igaz. Az isteni gondviselés, a világgazdaság pénzbősége, meg trükkök százai, amiről nyilvánvalóan neked meg kell tudni.
That was the leader of the Left Party after their victory in 2006. It was exactly the kind of anti-elite fodder Orbán needed for his populist rhetoric. As if that wasn't enough, just 2 years later, back in the United States, the American housing market collapsed, taking the global financial system with it. Chaos ensued. Hungary's economy, highly dependent on foreign investment, was acutely exposed and hit hard. What followed was a devastating crisis of confidence in the political elite, globalization, and liberalism writ large. In both Hungary and the US, nothing would ever be the same again. Ever a man of the moment, and now seeming even more prophetic, Orbán was once again well positioned in this changing world. By the time the next Hungarian election rolled around in 2010, the ruling coalition was in ruins. Orbán's Fidesz, on the other hand, secured fully 68% of the seats in parliament. I mean, look at this map. They won every single district in the country but 3. With that supermajority, Orbán and his party set to work, totally reshaping Hungary's legal and political system, passing an entirely new constitution in 2011. That same year saw a new electoral law, redrawing the country's districts and shrinking parliament. That would prove invaluable to Orbán in 2014, when his party's share of the vote dove to a mere 44%. Thanks to the gerrymandered map, Fidesz held on to 67% of seats. Still a supermajority. Orbán was emboldened. After all, with that kind of job security, why not be? So, just months after the election, he went, as they say, mask off, and declared his intention to build an illiberal state in Hungary. His own words exactly. Hungary, Orbán promised, was on a path away from liberalism, away from how free democracy had been understood for hundreds of years. Still, few outside Europe took notice of the man or his project. But 1 year later, as the 2015 migrant crisis swept Europe, Hungary found itself on the front line. Orbán, himself suddenly in the spotlight. While countries like Germany opened their doors, Orbán proclaimed Europe in the grip of madness, and the crisis a threat to Christianity, as he built a barbed wire fence along the border to halt crossings. Meanwhile, in America, Donald Trump rode a similar wave of populist resentment as he led chants of
Build a great wall.
and decried Mexican immigration
They're not sending their best.
as a threat to America.
Drugs, crime, rapists.
Orbán was thus a righteous leader in a struggle Republicans shared, and they took notice. This was Orbán's time to finally shine. But Orbán wasn't merely setting an example for immigration policy. By 2015, his all-out war on liberal democracy was well underway. He'd packed Hungary's highest court, turning it into a rubber stamp for his agenda, and subdued the free press, forcing opposition media into bankruptcy, making them bargain buys for wealthy allies. As he dismantled the separation of powers and squashed civil society, Orbán also sought to reduce some Hungarians to second-class citizens, paying straight couples to have children, while making it illegal for same-sex partners to do the same or adopt, and placing age restrictions on media with any depiction of homosexuality. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's top advisor, Steve Bannon, recognized Orbán's efforts, dubbing him Trump before Trump, as Donald himself tried and failed to achieve similar ends. In the aftermath of his 2020 defeat, Trump and his allies began to study Orbán more closely, looking for the keys to his success. After a number of leading conservative intellectuals journeyed to Budapest, Fox News superhost Tucker Carlson finally made his own pilgrimage to interview Orbán. Tucker lavished Orbán with praise and mocked observers concerned with the rapid erosion of Hungarian democracy. Since the interview, Orbán and the Republican Party have only grown closer. In May, the Conservative Political Action Conference held a major event in Hungary, with Orbán as headliner. And in August, CPAC welcomed him again with open arms in Dallas, despite Orbán denouncing race mixing only weeks prior, all while offering the constant refrain that it's just about immigration or family-friendly policy.
It's strictly business.
In a very real sense, the story of Viktor Orban is also the story of the Republican Party. The man who went from liberal to anti-liberal.
The globalists can all go to hell. I have come to Texas.
And the party,
anyone from any corner of the earth can come to live in America and become an American.
that did the same.
Build that wall! Build that wall!
And just as the stories are the same, so too are the plot holes. In Budapest, Orbán fingers the European Union as the source of Hungary's woes, while Brussels bankrolls Fidesz vanity projects. He touts himself a warrior for the Hungarian people, yet uses his office to enrich himself and his friends. And in America, Trump proclaimed himself a champion of the working class, a swamp-draining vanquisher of corruption, even as he cut taxes for the rich and funneled taxpayer dollars to his golf courses, hotels, and resorts. Even worse, both of these men capstone their hypocrisy with the most profoundly anti-liberal lies. Orbán and his adherents defend Hungary as democratic, even as information is restricted, speech is limited, and a warped electoral map returns predictably disproportionate and pro-Fidesz results, while Trump and his loyalists defend the fantasy that the 2020 election was somehow stolen. Regardless of what inspiration people like Tucker Carlson and others may claim they take from Orbán,
Family, history, tradition, language. It's not hard to have a decent country. It's not complicated.
Orbán's example is more complicated and dangerous. While he may promise that democracy can be maintained without liberalism, his cronyism, corruption, and callous discrimination give the lie to illiberalism's rotten fruits. The story of the decline of Hungarian democracy is an important one, especially with so many trying to whitewash this history while endorsing Orbán. So thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe for more stories that matter to democracy and to help us continue telling them.